Ladies and gentlemen, we thank CIVS for the invitation. It's an honor to speak here, and I have to apologize that our talk will not be in French, but in English. It's my fault. Leah is perfect. Yeah, we want to start our presentation with a short slideshow to show how the German Reich expanded over Europe from 1938 on. Yeah, in all countries and regions it got under its control, the German Reich set up its regime and started the persecution of persons that the Nazis defined as public enemies because of their origin, their religion, their politics, their sexual orientation, their social position. We have to move on here a bit, but the slideshow will stop in the year 1942 when the Wehrmacht reached Stalingrad. The Battle of Stalingrad was the turning point of World War II in Europe, but until the National Socialist regime was finally defeated, it still took another 2 years and millions of deaths. And in these 2 years, the Nazis brought the Holocaust also to Italy, Greece, Hungary, and Slovakia. It was already said by Stuart Eisenstadt and others, the looting of cultural property in Europe from 1933 to 1945 was not only due to the greed of some Nazi VIPs, it was one element of the Holocaust. Yeah, let's go back to March 1938 in Austria, to the so-called Anschluss of Austria. See what happens? Now, it turns brown. Austria's capital, Vienna, was now the second biggest city of the German Reich after Berlin and before Hamburg. 1.8 million people lived in Vienna in 1938, and over 10% of them were Jewish or so-called Mischlinge, according to the Nuremberg laws. The 4 persons you see on the screen were all Austrians, and they built up a network within the bureaucracy of the Nazi regime in Austria. Arthur Seyß-Inquart, born in 1892, was a jurist and National Socialist politician. He became Chancellor of Austria on the 11th of March 1938 for just 3 days. Then the Anschluss took place, and Seyß-Inquart became Reichsstatthalter of Austria. Hans Fischbeck was born in 1895. He also was a jurist and a manager in the field of banks and insurances. On the 11th of March 1938, he became Austrian Minister for Trade and Transport, later for Economy, Labor and Finance. He invented the so-called Vermögensanmeldungen. All Jews had to declare their property over 5,000 Reichsmark. These declarations had to be sent to the Vermögensverkehrsstelle that Fischbeck had established in his ministry. So the regime had a basis for the following expropriation of Jews. Cajetan Mühlmann, born in 1898, was an art historian and worked for Max Reinhardt and the Salzburg Festival. Acquainted to prominent Nazis since the 1920s, he became Secretary of the State in the government of Arthur Seyß-Inquart in 1938. He was in charge of art affairs in the Ministry for Interior and Cultural Affairs, and this included administration and exploitation of the property of the so-called public enemies. Franz Kieslinger, we have no photo of Franz Kieslinger until now, was born in 1891, was an art historian and specialist in glass paintings and medieval sculpture. After the Anschluss, he, as an art expert, inventoried and estimated many art collections of Jewish owners. And when the Munich auctioneer Adolf Weinmüller, we saw the book on the screen, organized the Viennese auction house Eskender in fall 1938, Kieslinger became the manager. And Franz Kieslinger worked for and together with Cajetan Mühlmann. These 4 men covered the chain of efficient looting, from Franz Kieslinger, who knew in detail about the collections of persecuted persons, up to the top of the Nazi regime in Austria, to Arthur Seyß-Inquart. In October 1939, Seyß-Inquart went to Poland and became the deputy of Generalgouverneur Hans Frank. Cajetan Mühlmann followed him and started to organize the looting of art in the Generalgouvernement. 7 months later, on the 15th of May 1940, the Netherlands capitulated, the German Reich set up its occupation system. And we again, let's see, yeah, find the same 4 persons. Arthur Seyss-Inquart became Reichskommissar for the Netherlands. Hans Fischböck, Generalkommissar for Economy and Finance for the Netherlands. Cajetan Mühlmann established the so-called Dienststelle Mühlmann and supported by Franz Kieslinger and others. He was in charge of what he had started in Austria and professionalized in Poland, the looting of art. And I give over to Lea.
So the title of our presentation is The Traces of Art Under Control of Nazi Germany in World War II. And we just heard how systematically organized and widespread this control or network became in the end of the 30s and the beginning of the 40s. So while this control became more and more established and more documented, the traces of people persecuted and previously, who could previously sovereignly dispose of their actions and belongings and documents became more and more splintered, fragmented, and eradicated throughout Europe. And one of those traces is this case with the coffee and tea porcelain set today present at the Rijksmuseum. It's a trace of Margarete and Franz Oppenheimer from Berlin and their flight throughout Europe from 36 to 41. Franz Oppenheimer was a lawyer and he was working for the coal factory Emanuel Friedländer in Berlin, originally from Hamburg. And Margarete came originally from Vienna. They were two of the they had one of the most significant porcelain collections during their time in Berlin in the 20s and 30s, and chiefly mice porcelain, which you can see here. Nevertheless, not much is known about them, so I would love to show you a picture of Margarete and Franz Oppenheimer, but until now we couldn't find one which might speak for itself or against me. So nevertheless, I think it shows even more maybe how research can still bring us close to their traces. Margarete and Franz Oppenheimer in 1936 converted to Catholicism because they felt the urge, as they both were Jewish, and they still felt the urge to leave Berlin because of the rising Nazi government and changing structures in Berlin. They, for the first time, had to pay 1 million Reichsmark or Reichsflight taxes to flee the country as a partial expropriation, and their apartment in Berlin was confiscated by the Nazis. But we know that they can bring parts of their collection to Vienna, where they went to, so the place where Margarete Oppenheimer was born, because of different correspondences in Vienna. So we, for example, have this correspondency between the Federal Monuments Authority in Vienna and the authorities in Vienna documenting that their collection in Vienna was confiscated as well. And it says that it talks about the safeguarding of the emigrants' collection Franz Oppenheimer in the Riesener Straße 48 in Vienna. And what is interesting about it is that the letter talks about confiscation of the apartment and this very valuable collection, but it states that parts of the collection were missing. And those attached to this letter, attached to this correspondence, is a list which states the objects which couldn't be found in the apartment of Franz and Margarete Oppenheimer. It's a list from 1937, and it states that Franz Oppenheimer registered his collection at the Federal Monuments Authority as soon as the couple came to Vienna, and that he registered it in April 1937, but they removed it from custom sale again in September 1937. So he did that to preempt export bans which applied to valuable collections in that time in Vienna. On this list, we interestingly have this case containing a coffee set, and this number 13 indicates that it's marked with a coat of arms showing the coat of arms of the Doge Morosini from Venice. And if we have a look again at the set of the Rijksmuseum, we can almost be sure that this is the same, because normally porcelain is produced in a large number, but this is such a high recognition value that we can almost be sure that the same, case Franz Oppenheimer removed from the custom sale in 1937 is the same set which is present today at the Rijksmuseum. 1 month later, Franz Oppenheimer himself wrote a letter to the Federal Monuments Authority talking about considering what to do with this collection, and in the end of this letter he refers back to the porcelain, and he asked, could you please also send me back the photographs of this collection, because during this week a friend will come along and I would like to show the porcelain or the photographs of them to him. So who was this friend? We know for sure that the porcelain appeared for the first time in the collection of Fritz Mannheimer in Amsterdam between 1936 and 1939. This was we remember this was 1937. Fritz Mannheimer was a Jewish German collector and banker working in Amsterdam since the 1920s, and his collection was recuperated after the Second World War to Amsterdam. He also collected Meissen porcelain, he collected valuable artworks, and we know as well that that Franz Oppenheimer and Fritz Mannheimer were active in the same circles. Furthermore, he was in a sanatorium, in the cottage sanatorium in September 1937 in Vienna. So it's very likely that Franz and Margarete Oppenheimer had to sell at least this porcelain in context of persecution between, obviously, probably in 1937 and probably to Fritz Mannheimer. Even more interesting is that there exists a historian commission report from Liechtenstein in a totally different context on dormant assets, stating that Franz Oppenheimer and Margarete Oppenheimer applied for a Liechtenstein nationality for several months, and that they were granted Liechtenstein nationality shortly before the Anschluss in 1938. This nationality was connected to paying a high purchasing sum and annual taxes. So it's very likely that they needed money for their further flight. But the couple never actually had a residency in Liechtenstein. At the time of the Anschluss and their confiscation in Vienna, they were already in Budapest. And one really interesting document stating or giving an overview of their flight is this passenger report, which states that they've been on a ship on 41 from Barranquilla, so Colombia, to the US. And they were 70 and 63, both German, having a Liechtenstein nationality, Hebrew, and originally from Germany or Austria, now Germany, that's why it's all crossed out. And their last residency was Stockholm. So we know that they went from Budapest via Prague to Stockholm, and then finally via Colombia to the US. And I think this last image shows best how all those splintered and fragmented traces can be brought together through the research, and how close we can get to a person, although we don't have personal documentation of them, but we can still find the traces and can somehow get close to what might also still be left in Budapest, Stockholm, and all those other archives. One last interesting remark, coming back to the beginning, or what Leo already told us, is that this collection, after showing up in Amsterdam, was sold by the Dienststelle Mühlmann in 1941 to the Linz Museum in Austria, to the Hitler Museum, through this Mannheimer collection. Shortly after the war, we have the Nuremberg trials, and there this term comes up again, like we safeguarded the collection, and we have here a statement by Seyss-Inquart talking about this safeguarding and taking care of the collection, and we will come back to that later. And I give back you.
Yes, so I think this case shows that provenance research has to be European, because we have European problems and networks in history. Yeah, we have already heard that this was also a problem in the beginning of restitution after World War II. The monuments men they tried to find the depots and tried to find the objects, brought them together to the central collecting points. The objects are researched and brought then to the countries where they came from. Some of the countries restituted more or less, but in a way, everywhere some objects stayed back, and that's why we have still a lot to do. The next step, I do it rather fast, I think. I will hand over to you. This is very slow. Now.
Nothing new on this slide. So it took a while until the paradigm of discourse changed again, and during the Washington Principles and the Washington Conference, which we discussed during the whole day, actually, those ideas of giving back artworks were coming up again, and that was actually also, and we also heard that before, that this was actually the start of provenance research, because provenance research is on the basis of fair and just solution, of finding out about those traces of people.
Okay, works.
Yeah, and also that is coming up again. So the first countries were starting to create commissions, and we have those 5 countries having restitution commissions, but there were also other countries started to do provenance research. So we heard about the Terezín Declaration, and for example, the Czech Republic, and it became clear that we needed publication, which we also saw in the last presentation, conferences. Also in Czech Republic, we had this 10 years of Terezín Declaration, we had this 20 years of the Washington Principles in Berlin, which shows more and more that there are also workshops on doing exhibitions and more publications. And what is probably still the most important point is personal exchange. So the research we are doing is very much based on personal exchange. And
yeah, you've seen this. This is the website of Arbeitskreis, but you see here the English and the French version. Arbeitskreis was founded by 4 researchers in 2000. And in 2014, Arbeitskreis Provenienzforschung became an association. It started with 69 members. And today, 5 years later, the Arbeitskreis has 320 members from Germany, France, the Netherlands, Austria, Switzerland, the United Kingdom, and the US. And this week, from Monday to Wednesday, the Arbeitskreis had its annual meeting, this time in Düsseldorf. And in this room, there are some I have seen that have been there, and I think, and I hope that you, as me, I think that this was really 3 days of interesting and professional exchange. So, in a way, the provenance researchers have found a way to organize themselves. It's not only within the Arbeitskreis, it's also outside. We have a good community, but we need more structures. What do we need?
so the first thing is maybe what starts when we start working in different countries and with people from different fields and especially different perspectives is an exchange of information, not only of information but also of perspective. And it probably starts with a critical self-reflection of the maybe also voice of enunciation from which you're talking. So doing research in the Netherlands is probably very different in terms of local, regional, national knowledge than doing research in Austria, but also in terms of the framework you're working in. So you really have to know the history, but you also have to know things like, I mean, that's might be an obvious example, but this terms of safeguarding or looking at sources in time and space. And then, of course, like the exchange between the different institutions, between different disciplines, and listening to each other. So, and then we come to the situation of the archive today.
So, oh, it's one. No, it's okay. So, information exchange needs management. So we have information and we have to deal with it. So, yeah, it's the big challenge, and not only in the field of provenance research, we know. Digital platforms can help us, to manage our information, but before we do so, we have to develop the scientific and technical standards for our discipline. And although that is not easy, we have to overcome cultural and linguistic differences. I think to bring together archival systems in European countries, this is really a challenge. Quite a lot to do. Many digital projects, databases, websites, and who remembers the CD-ROM, have vanished or are not usable anymore. So we have learned that digital media can vanish, and we have to avoid that for the future and have to find ways to preserve our data and our knowledge. And finally, it is essential to bear in mind that we need tools that are not just fancy technical solutions, but that in the first case support our work. Okay. Ich habe es nicht lesen können, ich bin schon so gut sicher.
Sorry.
It took some time.
Okay. We will get there. Yeah, maybe this point is actually also connected to everything. Also, what we heard before is because languages can mean digital languages and can mean also understanding the position of someone else and the position from which someone else is talking to, and I think that's very important. But obviously, also this is also connected to like this first level of languages and connected to, for example, translations of relevant books, relevant texts. And connected to, if we want to connect it to digital translation, that might be a possibility to come together. Again, personal exchange, because if we work internationally, we can help each other. And of course, an obvious point by learning languages ourselves.
This is one thing I should think about. So finally, yes, we need to expand our European network that already exists. But we have to bear in mind Europe is not only Western Europe, it's not only the European Union, it's more than that. We need to go to the Eastern Europe countries, to the Southeast and so on. And of course over that, because the art market is international, looted art is everywhere in the world. Yeah, and I think there is still a lot to do, and I said this sometimes in this talk, but I think this is the message. We have some more years for work. Thank you.